Let's go! Welcome to the Kaiju Ketsugo TCG tutorial video. In this tutorial, we're going to quickly work through traditional play with 2 players. Let's get started. First, let's go over what each player needs. A 53 card deck. A constructed deck works just fine, or you can build your own. 7 jewel cards. These will act as points during the game to help you determine
who gets the victory.
Sorry. A way to keep track of E, or energy. We're going to use these handy tokens here, because we've got the board. And a coin, because there are definitely going to be some coin flips. Let's take a look at what cards you might find in your Kaiju Ketsugo deck. First and foremost, we have Kaiju. These are monsters that spar and use abilities that influence the game's outcome. They're divided into a few different categories: Origin, Ascended 1, and Ascended 2. They can also be further divided into jewel types and jewel subtypes. On the Kaiju card, you'll find a lot of information, like its name, and in this case we have a Cubsorb, its jewel type, which is water, and its subtype, liquid. So Cubsorb is a liquid water Kaiju. Now let's take a look at another Kaiju, Cubberg, an ice water jewel type. On this Kaiju's card, you'll find information regarding its ascension, which is a fancy word for transformation, which is another fancy word for how it changes. On this card though, you'll find information about how it ascends, like which Kaiju it ascends from, and which jewel subtype is needed to make the ascension possible. So Cubberg ascends from Cubsorb, but needs a Sky Air Kaiju wrested from your hand to make it happen. In the bottom right corner of a Kaiju's photo frame, you'll find its E, or energy. Energy is very important, and it'll change throughout the course of a game. It's kind of like its life points, or HP. Or if you're from Canada, HP. Right next to that, you're going to find a V, which stands for Vulnerability. Kaiju with these subtypes are going to do 2 times the damage to Cubberg. Poor Cubberg. On the lower half of the Kaiju card, you're going to find abilities. And while the abilities all do exactly what they say, they can be divided into 3 categories. Passive, which can be used while the Kaiju is in any position. Active, which can only be used while the Kaiju is in the primary position. This signifies the end of a player's turn. And support. These abilities can only be used while a Kaiju is in a support position. And there's a lot to unpack here, so we'll break down more as the tutorial progresses. But let's take a look now at utility cards. These are cards that supplement the gameplay and usually revolve around what cards you have in your hand or how the turns go. There are 2 different kinds. There is the action card, which can only be played on your turn, and the reaction card, which can only be played on an opponent's turn. Sometimes utility cards have jewel types. These can only be played while you have a Kaiju in play that matches that jewel type. Next up, we have the environment card. These cards greatly support all the Kaiju in play or your hand. These always have a jewel type, so they can only be played while you have a Kaiju in play that matches that jewel type. Last but not least, we have jewel cards. These are your points. When you collect all 7 of these, you are the victor, and that's cause for celebration. Easy enough, right? Let's start a game. At the beginning of a game, both players are going to ensure their decks are sufficiently shuffled. Once you're all mixed up, you'll put your decks face down in the deck pile location. Next, you're going to turn your jewel cards face down in the jewel pile location. Now you're ready to determine who's on first. Rock, paper, scissors, or a coin flip works fine. Once that's sorted, both players are going to draw 7 cards from their deck and lay an Origin Kaiju face down in the primary position. A dedicated spot for your primary Kaiju. You have to have a Kaiju here at all times, or you lose. This position is what allows a Kaiju to use their active ability. In this position, a kaiju can only use active and passive abilities. The position directly behind is the environment card space. This is where an environment card lives for the entire game after you place it. Beside that are 2 support kaiju positions. In these positions, a kaiju can use support and passive abilities, but not active abilities. Think of these kaiju as helpers for the primary kaiju. Then there's the rest pile, where all of your spent cards will go to take a breather until the game is over. There's also a collected jewel pile. This is where you're going to place your jewel cards
After you've annihilated your opponents.
Back to the game. So you and your opponent have put an origin kaiju face down in the primary position. Cool. Let's begin. You'll flip them over and it's the first player's turn. Each turn will go like this. You draw a card, then you play utility cards, you place kaiju in support, use passive abilities, use support abilities, anything goes and in any order. On the first turn though, the first player cannot use active abilities. On the second player's turn, they draw a card to signify the beginning of their turn. Then they play utility cards, place kaiju in support, use passive abilities, use support abilities, anything goes, and in any order. But now the second player can use active abilities. Now when you use an active ability, remember to always check for vulnerabilities on your opponent's kaiju. In this case, the defending kaiju isn't vulnerable, so the defending kaiju's E will be reduced by the number on the attacking kaiju's active ability. Using an active ability marks the end of your turn though, so make sure to only use an active ability when you're finished with everything else. The goal is to reduce your opponent's kaiju's E to 0, what we call depletion. When an opponent's kaiju's E is depleted, you draw a jewel card from your jewel pile and place it in your collected jewel pile. 1-0. You're winning. But don't celebrate just yet! The game is just beginning. You and your opponent can use a myriad of tactics to prevent a kaiju's E from becoming reduced. One of those ways is called Ascension. Ascension is when a kaiju transforms from one subtype to another. You can't ascend a kaiju on the first turn it was put into play, but on the next turn, if you meet the Ascension Kaiju's ascension requirements, you can ascend it! All you have to do is rest the ascension requirements, which just means you put it in the rest pile from your hand. In this case, you need to rest a Sky Air Kaiju from your hand. Kuberg also has a descension, which means it can go back from Ascended 1 to its origin. The descension requirements are on the Ascended card also. You'll just rest the required card to send it back to origin. And it says that it came from a Cubzorb, and it needs a Flame Fire Kaiju to descend. Now here's the cool thing. Each time a kaiju ascends or descends, its E becomes the number on the card. That's a good way to avoid getting your E depleted, because it starts over again. When your kaiju's E finally is depleted though, you'll need to move it into the rest pile, and the primary position becomes empty. You'll immediately move a kaiju up from support to take its place, so it's important to always have a kaiju in support, just in case. Because if you don't have a kaiju in primary, the game is over, and you lose. Check this out though. Once a kaiju is in play, it cannot move until its E is depleted, or you find an ability that allows you to change its position with another. So choose wisely which place you place the you know the thing. And those, my friends, are the basics. For more advanced and technical questions, feel free to refer to the comprehensive rule set at kaijuketsugo.com. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in play.
Let's go! Step into the mystery where the truth discovers us. All of the history of a world.